All of my content is also posted on 5colorcombo.com, a great website for all of your Magic the Gathering needs, including articles, podcasts, and custom Magic the Gathering tokens and playmats. As a subscriber to my channel, you can use the discount code NEETZAHONE5 for a 5% discount in their store. You can find the link in the description below. Hello everyone and welcome to another MTG Top 10. I'm NEETZAHONE and I post a new MTG related Top 10 list each and every Friday. Today's list is the first in a two-part series that will involve me looking back at my predictions for Kaladesh Limited and discussing places where I was wrong. This week we're looking at the top 10 cards in Kaladesh Limited that I underrated, and next week we'll look at the cards that I overrated. Obviously, when I do my limited review videos, I do it before I've had a chance to play with the cards. Now, having drafted this format a ton of times, I feel like I can revisit my predictions and point out where I made some mistakes. This list is made up of cards that have overperformed for me in Kaladesh Draft, so they have been much better than I expected. In some cases, these aren't cards that I discussed in any detail in my limited review, but the cards have still proven to be better than I expected, and so for each of these cards, I'll point out what sort of my expectation was, and then, also indicate how I feel about the card now. So at number 10, we have Consulate Skygate. Don't get me wrong, this isn't a card I think is amazing or anything, and it's not a card I even mentioned at all in my limited review, but it is a card that I had incredibly low expectations for. Now, this is a card that I thought would be playable basically only in decks that really wanted artifacts, or in decks that managed to open a couple of amazing bomb creatures, and could go a control route and use this thing to help you close out the game, to help you get to the late game, rather. Turns out that this thing is better than that. Don't get me wrong, the card, again, not incredible by any means, and you should never ever take this early, but honestly, I wouldn't mind having this card in every single sideboard of every deck I ever draft in the format. Turns out a 0/4 with reach blocks a lot of powerful and commonly played flyers who just get blanked by this guy. 3-power flyers like Sky Snare Thopter and Sky Swirl Harrier are embarrassing against this card, among others. It is also a perfectly mainboardable card in a deck that likes artifacts, or in a Blue-White Skies deck that itself can dominate the skies and can afford to leave a 0/4 back on the ground to help you win in a race. In short, this thing is actually pretty solid, a great card to come out of the board against decks with lots of flyers, and a solid card in a deck that likes artifacts. At number 9, I have Sky Swirl Harrier. Another card that I want to stress is certainly not incredible by any means and should not be taken early, but has overperformed for me based on my expectation that it would be a playable you would begrudgingly play if you didn't have something better for the top of your curve. Instead, the Harrier is a card that I would be happy to have one of in most white decks that I draft. It is good in an aggro as a curve topper, and it's good in a removal heavy deck as a win condition. This card still doesn't crack my list of the top white commons, but it is a very playable card that has led me to victory on several occasions and beaten me on a few others. At number 8, I have Inventor's Goggles. This is a card that I ranked fairly highly. I had it as the second best common artifact after Renegade Freighter, and it still isn't anywhere close to as good as the Freighter, but it is much better than I expected it to be. And I've been happy with this card anytime I've played it in an aggressive deck. In my limited review, I noted that +1/+2 isn't too far off what I'd be willing to get off of an equipment with a cost like this, and the fact that it can equip for free to several creatures in the format makes it even better. Turns out in this format, paying 2 for +1/+2 is usually a pretty good deal. Why? Because much of the removal in this format is damage-based. Things like Furious Reprisal, Chandra's Pyrohelix, Essence Extraction, and Welding Sparks are in danger of no longer being useful once you get +2 toughness to your creature. The toughness boost also makes it so you can frequently attack into boards you just couldn't before. What's more is this card is an artifact, a relevant card type all the time. Basically, I think this card is playable even with 0 Artificers, which wasn't something I thought was the case in the format before I had actually played it, but it is worth playing even if you have 0 Artificers because the bonus it grants is actually pretty good for the cost. At number 7, I have Minister of Inquiries. When discussing this card in my archetype video about the energy-based decks, I mentioned that I didn't think this guy should be played 99% of the time because there are just better things to do with energy. Mill effects are traditionally pretty bad, especially in sets without a dedicated mill sub-theme. This is the only card in the format that lets you mill, and that's the reason they're bad on their own is because you are effectively doing nothing for your investment until your opponent loses the game. Well, turns out Minister of Inquiries is actually playable, though only in incredibly energy-heavy decks, and if you are in one of those, still don't take this guy early as you can expect him to wheel. Turns out many blue-based decks can produce a ton of energy, and winning a game with Minister of Inquiries really isn't that hard. Paying 1 energy for the effect is actually a pretty good deal because you don't have to invest mana or anything else to do it, so you're not really losing a whole lot of tempo or anything. What's more is this format seems to turn into board stalls fairly frequently, and this card pressures your opponent even when neither player can attack. I found myself having to stick Malfunction on this guy more than once because I was in the single digits on cards. In short, he's actually a solid win condition in decks that can produce a lot of energy. There are still better ones, it's worth noting, but he is solid, and he can definitely win you some games, especially in slower matchups. At worst, he's a decent sideboard card if you're an energy deck and you run into someone who's just like a deck that's just loaded with removal and loaded with ways to slow you down, and loaded with ways to create a board stall, because the Minister can help break through those. At number 6, I have Doomed Operative. I thought this was a solid card, and one that I would play in basically any black deck, given that it is a bear with some upside, but I think it is even better than that now. It is pretty easy to turn on, even just in black, because of Fabricate, and once you pair with other colors, you end up with even more ways to make this work. And once this is a 3-2 Death Touch, it is not particularly easy to deal with. It is hard to block and hard to attack through, and while removal still works on it, a lot of the time you're going to be finishing even in mana or ahead in mana when your opponent has to use removal on it. In my limited review, I didn't mention Doomed Operative as one of the best black commons, but mentioned Subtle Strike as an honorable mention. And while I think Subtle Strike is still plenty good, I think Doomed Operative edges it out in most situations, and I would take it above Subtle Strike, making this about the 5th best black common in the set. I would still take, 4th rather, because I would still take 3 black commons before it: Foundry Screecher, Die Young, and Tidy Conclusion. Again, not a card you should pick early, but it's a card I feel pretty okay about taking in the middle of a pack, especially if I'm in black and clearly going to have plenty of artifacts. At number 5, I have Eddie Trailhawk. This is a card that I didn't think was bad or anything, but I wasn't overly excited about the idea of playing one either. However, it turns out this is a pretty great card, and I usually want at least one of them in most decks with white in them, especially if they're aggressive. Especially in green-white, where you can throw cards like Arborback Stomper and Riparian Tiger into the sky, something that is very frightening to have happen to you, and awesome when you're doing it. This card makes it difficult for your opponent to slow down your aggressive start, because even if they manage to play blockers on the ground, you can just start giving creatures flying and continuing your onslaught. It turns out that the average size of creatures in this format tends to be quite large, something that will have a bigger impact on next week's list, and I'll talk about more there. But as a result, almost any color you pair this card with has good cards to give flying to help you close out a game, and because of that, it's a very solid white card. I feel fine taking it in the middle of packs, especially once it's clear I'm going to be in an aggressive deck. At number 4, we have a card I missed pretty badly on. I thought Skysif was playable, but I also ranked several common, uncommon vehicles ahead of it, including things like Beaumont, Bazaar Barge, and Ballista Charger. Whoops. Turns out the Crew 3 vehicles, while solid, are not always easy to get online. I think this is actually the 3rd best of the common or uncommon vehicles. I still like Renegade Freighter and Oval Chase Dragster more in most decks. A crew cost of 1, though, is stupid low, and a servo being able to crew it makes it so much better. It provides an evasive threat in the latter part of the game when your opponent stabilizes against your aggro deck, on top of the fact that it is an artifact, something that is very relevant in this format. I still don't love going after this card early, but if you're clearly an aggro deck and you see one of these mid-pack, it's not a bad card to be picking up. At number 3, I have Aether Theorist. If I had to pick a color that I screwed up the most on in my limited review, it would be blue. And that is something that you'll see with some of the remaining cards in this video, as well as in some of the cards in next week's video. I thought Aether Theorist was a fine card, but I wasn't especially excited about it. Now, I think this is one of the best blue commons, only outdone by a card that appears later in this list and Malfunction, so it's the 3rd best blue common now. I don't really know how I missed on this card, since I loved Sigiled Starfish, and that's basically what it is, except that it has power of 1 instead of 0. Energy is really easy to come by most of the time in blue, and even if it isn't, a 1-3, perfectly solid stats that lets you scry a couple of times is actually a pretty big deal. He's at his best in less aggressive decks, but I don't even hate running one of them in an aggressive deck, as he can dig you out of board stalls by helping you dodge lands when you don't need them. Basically, scrying is a powerful effect, and energy is easier to come by than I expected, so this card has gone way up in my pick order. At number 2, I have Arborback Stomper. Don't get me wrong, in my review I thought this was a very good card, but I had several green uncommons ranked ahead of it. I had him as my honorable mention for best green common, and so he was number 4 basically, and now I don't think that should be the case. While I think Nature's Way is still the best green common or uncommon, I think Arborback Stomper is the next best green common or uncommon to open in your first pack. 5 mana for what is frequently going to be the biggest threat on the field with Trample is already a nice deal, but on top of that, he completely screws up races for your opponents, almost to the same degree as playing a creature with lifelink. He brings 5 power to the race and gains you 5 life right away, so it's similar to the swing like I'm saying, and gets even better when you can bounce or blink him, something possible when paired with green with white. I found myself first picking him, with white or blue, that is. I found myself first picking him in packs that didn't have any premium removal or a bomb rare on several occasions, and that's how I know I missed on this card, because I didn't really think of it as a first pickable uncommon, only thinking Nature's Way was the first pickable uncommon for your first pack. But turns out Arborback Stomper deserves that credit as well. Here's the card that I missed the hardest on in my limited review, Gear Seeker Serpent. This thing is pretty nuts and one of the best common cards in the whole format, and a card that feels like it should definitely be at least uncommon, right? How I missed on it, I'm unsure. I thought that perhaps getting his cost down would be harder than it is. Turns out it's pretty easy to do, no matter what color you pair it with, and he is very easy to build around. Because it is so easy to build around in a format loaded with artifacts, I have found myself first picking this card in packs without premium removal or a bomb rare or uncommon. This card has beaten me on numerous occasions and has won me a lot of games as well. Even if I am still paying 5 for this guy, I feel like I'm doing a good job, and he frequently costs less than that. The fact that he can also become unblockable is amazing for the board stalls. I'm willing to say that it is better than every other non-rare or mythic blue card in the format, which means this one is a pretty big miss for me, because it didn't even get mentioned as one of Blue's best commons. So that's pretty bad. Next week we're going to see some more examples of how I screwed up on Blue. You already saw 2 of them here, but I think there's more to be had. That does it for this week's MTG Top 10. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to click the like button. If you have any suggestions for other cards that I underrated that should have been in this list, let me know in the comments. And if you want to make sure you watch MTG Top 10 and other MTG content each and every week, don't forget to subscribe. Thanks for watching.